That night on Christmas Eve, I found myself standing outside my own home, my hands trembling in the cold, while the sound of my daughter-in-law's voice cut through the falling snow like a knife. "Leave," she screamed, her eyes blazing with a hatred I could not comprehend. "This is not your house anymore. You are only in the way." The door slammed behind me, the holiday lights twinkling above the porch, mocking me with their artificial warmth. I stood there stunned, the weight of 70 years pressing down on my chest, my breath fogging in the frigid air. It was not the snow that made me shiver. It was betrayal. My son was inside, silent, watching his wife humiliate me on the holiest night of the year. He did not move. He did not defend me. He simply turned away. Do you know what it feels like to be treated as a stranger in the place you built with your own hands? To be cast aside like yesterday's trash, when all you ever did was give and sacrifice for your family? As the snowflakes fell, landing gently on my shoulders, I felt the sting not of winter, but of humiliation that burned hotter than any fire. I had decorated that house for decades. I had baked cookies every Christmas for children who now looked away when their mother spat venom at me. And I had filled those walls with laughter and music. And now, on the night when the world sings of family and love, I was banished like a criminal. I walked slowly down the icy driveway, every step echoing with memories. The garland I had once hung with my late husband still framed the windows, though now its lights flickered dimly, as if ashamed of the cruelty inside. My neighbors' homes were filled with joy, children's laughter spilling out, while I carried only silence, broken glasses, and the weight of rejection. My suitcase, hastily thrown together after my daughter-in-law's shrill commands, was light in weight, but heavy with symbolism. It contained only a few clothes, a Bible, and the old photo album of my late husband. Everything else remained in the house, my house, that they had claimed as theirs. I remember the exact moment my son looked at me before turning away. His eyes did not hold anger nor sorrow, but something worse, cowardice. He had chosen comfort over conscience, silence over justice. My heart cracked then, not because of my daughter-in-law's cruelty, but because of my son's betrayal. A son who once promised he would always protect me, now standing by while I was thrown out into the snow. The street was eerily quiet. My footsteps crunched in the fresh powder, each sound reminding me that I was alone on Christmas Eve, while my own family feasted on roast and wine inside the warmth of the home I had built. I passed the frosted window and caught a glimpse of them. My daughter-in-law was laughing, raising her glass, celebrating her victory as if humiliating me was the highlight of her holiday. My son sat beside her, his head bowed, avoiding my gaze, as though the shame was too heavy for him to carry, but he still carried it in silence. He still let her win. I stopped on the sidewalk and looked back at the house, at the lights I once strung with joy, at the doorway where I once welcomed every guest with warmth. The betrayal wrapped around me tighter than the winter wind. That house was more than wood and brick. It was the symbol of my survival after widowhood, the place I turned into a sanctuary with blood and sweat. My husband and I had dreamed of spending every Christmas together there, but when death claimed him, I carried on alone. I paid the mortgage. I cared for the lawn. I polished the windows. I planted the roses that now lay buried beneath the snow. Every corner of that place carried my fingerprints, and yet they told me I had no right to be there. Humiliation can do two things to a person. It can break them, or it can ignite a fire they never knew was still burning. As I stood under the street lamp, the snow swirling around me like a silent storm, I asked myself a question that cut deeper than any wound. How did I become the enemy in my own family? How did the woman who raised, fed, and clothed them become the burden they wanted to erase? I thought of every Christmas past, of the stockings I had hand-stitched for my grandchildren, each with their names embroidered in red thread. I thought of the countless nights I stayed up sewing dresses, working until my fingers bled, just to pay for my son's education. I thought of the times I went without new shoes so that he could have books for school. Was all of that invisible to him now? Did he forget every sacrifice? Or did he simply choose to ignore them for the sake of a woman who despised me? The wind howled, carrying with it the echoes of carols from down the street. "Silent night, holy night," someone sang in the distance. But my night was anything but holy. It was raw. It was cruel. It was unforgettable. My daughter-in-law's words rang in my ears like a curse. "This is not your house anymore." I wanted to scream, to pound on the door, to demand justice right there, but a voice inside me whispered something different. Not yet. Not like this. The humiliation burned, but it also sharpened me. I realized then that sometimes silence is not surrender. It is strategy. Sometimes walking away is not weakness. It is preparation. I clutched my suitcase tighter and walked further into the night. The snowflakes covered my footprints quickly, as if the world itself wanted to erase the memory of my expulsion. But I swore to myself nothing would erase it. Not from my heart, not from my mind. They thought they had silenced me, that throwing me out into the cold would finish me. They had no idea who I truly was. They had forgotten that I had fought battles long before they were even born. Poverty, widowhood, loneliness, and I had won them all. My chest tightened with rage, not the blind kind that makes you scream, but the cold, deliberate rage of someone who has endured and survived. As I stood under the heavy sky of Christmas Eve, I made myself a promise. This night would not be my defeat. This night would be my declaration of war. They would regret humiliating me. They would regret ever thinking I was powerless. Do you want to know the cruelest part? It wasn't being thrown into the snow with nothing but my suitcase. It wasn't hearing my daughter-in-law's laughter through the window as I froze outside. It wasn't even the silence of my son, which cut deeper than any knife. The cruelest part was the assumption. They assumed I would give up, that I would crawl into some corner of the world to die quietly, forgotten and erased. But they underestimated me. They had no idea that behind my wrinkles lived a memory sharper than steel, that behind my silence lived a voice that could roar when needed, and that behind my frail body lived the spirit of a woman who had fought for everything she owned. They thought Christmas Eve was my exile. What they didn't know was that it was only the beginning, because when dawn came, I would no longer be the woman standing outside in the cold. I would be the woman walking back into that house with the law on my side, with justice in my hands, and with a fire in my heart they could never extinguish. The first signs of betrayal never come with thunder or lightning. They arrive quietly, like shadows creeping into familiar corners, until one day you realize the house you thought was safe has been invaded from within. For me, it began months before Christmas Eve, though I was too blind with hope to recognize it. I had noticed little things at first. Papers that once sat neatly in the drawer of my oak desk had vanished. Important bills stacked in places I had never left them. At first, I told myself it was my own forgetfulness. After all, I am 70 years old. Perhaps age had begun to play tricks on me. That is what my daughter-in-law wanted me to believe. She had slowly taken control of the house. It started innocently enough, or at least it looked that way. She insisted on organizing the kitchen, moving my pots and pans, labeling the shelves with her own handwriting. "It will be easier this way," she said, smiling a smile that never touched her eyes. But the way she slammed my old porcelain teapot into the back of the cupboard told me otherwise. Then came the living room. She decided the armchairs I had bought with my husband were too old-fashioned. "We need a fresh look," she declared. I watched helplessly as she replaced them with cheap furniture ordered online, throwing the chairs I had polished for decades into the garage as though they were garbage. I tried to resist in small ways. I told her that the curtains had sentimental value, that the rug carried memories of my children playing on it, that the photographs on the walls were not decorations, but stories of our family. She would laugh, a cruel little laugh, and say, "Don't be so dramatic. They're just things." Just things. To her, perhaps. But to me, every stitch, every nail, every corner of that house was soaked with the sweat of survival. One afternoon, I went to my desk to pay the electricity bill and found the envelope gone. In its place was a neat little note in her handwriting, "Already taken care of." I froze. I'd never asked her to handle my bills. I never gave her permission. When I confronted her, she shrugged and said, "I was just helping. You should be grateful." Her tone was sharp, as if I were an ungrateful child. That was the first time I felt the sting of something darker, a power shifting beneath my feet. A few weeks later, I discovered that the drawer where I kept the property deeds was empty. My heart stopped. I searched everywhere, under the bed, behind the bookshelves, even in the attic. Nothing. When I asked my son if he had seen them, he avoided my eyes and muttered, "Maybe you misplaced them, Mom." Misplaced? I had guarded those documents for 20 years, always keeping them in the same drawer, always locked. Misplace them? Impossible. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the moment in my mind, the way my son's eyes darted away, the nervous twitch in his fingers. He was lying. He knew something. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled laughter of my son and his wife down the hall, their voices blending into the night like conspirators sharing secrets. Do you know what it feels like to sense betrayal, but not yet have the proof? It is like standing on thin ice, hearing the cracks beneath your feet, knowing you will fall into the freezing water any second but unable to move. That was me. I was trapped between suspicion and denial. I wanted to believe my son was still the boy who once kissed my cheek and promised to take care of me, but the evidence whispered otherwise. The following week, I went to the kitchen early in the morning and found my daughter-in-law rifling through the mail. She jumped when she saw me, hiding an envelope behind her back. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling with both fear and anger. She smirked and waved the envelope casually. "Oh, just sorting things. You always get so confused with all this paperwork." Confused. The word struck me like a slap. She was planting the seed of incompetence, trying to convince not only my son, but me, that I was losing my mind. That same day, I found my checkbook missing. Later, it reappeared on the counter, but 2 checks were gone. When I asked her, she laughed again, that same cruel laugh, and said, "Maybe you wrote them and forgot." My hands shook as I held the checkbook. Had I really forgotten, or was I being robbed in plain sight? I began to write down everything, every missing paper, every cruel laugh, every insult disguised as concern. I wrote them in a small notebook I kept under my pillow, the only place I knew she would never look. Each word was a stone, building the wall of my suspicion higher and higher. Still, I tried to convince myself it was just stress, just misunderstanding. After all, what mother wants to believe her own family is conspiring against her? But the truth has a way of breaking through denial. And mine came one night when I overheard a conversation through the thin walls of the house. I was lying in bed when I heard my daughter-in-law whispering urgently to my son. "She's getting suspicious. You need to handle her. If she finds those papers, everything will be ruined." My heart stopped. My breath caught in my throat. Papers. Which papers? My son's voice was softer, almost apologetic. "She's my mother. I don't want to hurt her." Her response was ice cold. "If you don't stand with me, you'll lose everything. Choose." I pressed my hand against my mouth to stop myself from crying out. In that moment, The shadows were no longer shadows. They were monsters in my own home. The betrayal I had feared was real, and the people plotting against me were the ones I had loved the most. I turned to the wall, tears soaking my pillow, and whispered into the darkness, "Why, God? Why my own child?" But no answer came. Only silence. Only the sound of their voices in the other room, weaving a net meant to trap me. That was the first round of betrayal, the beginning of the storm. At the time, I thought it was unbearable. I did not yet know that worse was coming, that they would one day throw me into the snow on Christmas Eve. If I had known then what I know now, perhaps I would have acted sooner. Perhaps I would have fought back earlier. But I was still clinging to hope, still blind with love for a son who no longer loved me back. Sometimes the truth doesn't reveal itself in arguments or in missing papers. Sometimes it slips out through the lips of someone who has no idea they're delivering a dagger straight into your heart. For me, that dagger came from a neighbor, spoken on an ordinary morning that became anything but ordinary. It was late autumn, a few weeks before Christmas. The air was sharp with the smell of burning wood, chimneys puffing thin clouds against a pale sky. I had gone outside to sweep the front porch, trying to hold on to the small routines that still gave me peace. The sound of crunching leaves echoed across the street, and that's when Mrs. Whitman, the neighbor who had lived next door for 30 years, waved at me over the fence. She was bundled in her thick brown coat, her little terrier tugging on its leash. "Eleanor," she called, smiling warmly, "I didn't know you had family visiting yesterday." I froze, the broom stiff in my hands. Family visiting? I hadn't invited anyone. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my pulse quickened in my throat. "Well," she continued, adjusting her scarf, "I saw 2 men in suits with clipboards and a younger woman walking around the property. They parked right in front of your driveway. Looked like they were inspecting the place. Realtors, maybe?" She tilted her head as if it were nothing unusual, just friendly conversation. The world tilted under my feet. Realtors, inspecting the house. My heart began to pound in my ears. I forced a smile and shook my head. I wasn't expecting anyone." "Oh," Mrs. Whitman said, clearly surprised. "Well, they spent quite a while out there. Took photos, measured the windows, even peeked into the backyard. I thought perhaps you were considering selling. It's such a lovely property. It would go quickly." Her words stabbed at me. Selling. The house I had built brick by brick after my husband's death. The house I had worked day and night for, sewing dresses until my eyes blurred, scrubbing floors, saving every penny. Sell it? The thought was absurd, yet here was a neighbor telling me strangers had walked across my lawn, measured my windows, and inspected my roses. I tried to steady my voice. Did you see who let them in?" Mrs. Whitman frowned slightly. "Well, yes. Your daughter-in-law was there, wasn't she? She was the one showing them around." I waved at her, but she looked in a hurry. "Didn't she tell you?" The broom slipped from my fingers, clattering onto the porch. My breath caught in my throat. My daughter-in-law, showing strangers my house, realtors, walking as if they owned the place, and my son nowhere in sight. I bent down to pick up the broom, hiding the tears that burned my eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitman," I said softly, forcing my lips into a smile that felt like a mask. It must have been some misunderstanding. She nodded politely and continued down the street, her dog pulling her away, leaving me standing there with my world collapsing around me. As soon as she turned the corner, I rushed inside, slamming the door behind me. My legs trembled so badly I had to grip the edge of the counter to steady myself. Realtors, inspections, my daughter-in-law acting as the hostess, as if she owned the house. My mind spun in frantic circles. Why hadn't I known? Why hadn't anyone told me? I hurried to the drawer where I once kept the property deeds, still empty. I checked the cabinet where I stored bills and contracts. Several folders were missing. Panic surged through me. Had they already started the process? Were they preparing to sell my sanctuary out from under me? That evening, when my son came home, I watched him closely. His face looked tired, his eyes shadowed. He kissed his wife on the cheek, whispered something that made her smirk, then sat at the table. I set down dinner in silence, my hands trembling as I placed the dishes. Finally, I asked, my voice steady though my heart was in chaos. Were there visitors here yesterday? He paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. Visitors? Yes, I pressed. Mrs. Whitman said she saw people walking around the property, realtors. His jaw tightened. He exchanged a quick glance with his wife, whose lips curled into a mocking smile. Then he laughed nervously. Oh, that. Just some friends of Megan's. They stopped by, that's all. Nothing to worry about. Mom. But his eyes betrayed him. He couldn't hold my gaze. His hand gripped his fork too tightly, his knuckles white. Friends? I whispered. Measuring the windows? Taking photos? He shrugged, his face flushed. You must have misunderstood. Mrs. Whitman probably exaggerated. Megan leaned back in her chair, sipping her wine with deliberate arrogance. You worry too much. Maybe you should rest more. Stress isn't good for someone your age. My age. The words echoed in my ears, a weapon disguised as concern. They wanted me to doubt myself, to believe that I was imagining things, that my memory was faltering. Gaslighting, they call it. At that table, under the soft glow of the chandelier I had chosen 20 years ago, I felt like a prisoner in my own home. My sanity questioned, my authority stripped away. I went to bed early that night, unable to eat. Lying in the dark, I listened to the whispers from the living room, their voices hushed but sharp, like knives slicing through the quiet. I caught fragments, papers, signatures, market value. Each word carved deeper into my chest. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of my yard. The evidence was there, faint footprints in the frost near the flower beds, a broken stem where someone had stepped too hard. Even the faint smell of cigarette smoke lingering near the porch, something neither my son nor his wife indulged in. Strangers had stood here, strangers who had judged my home like vultures circling prey. I felt the walls closing in, suspicion becoming certainty. They were planning to sell. They were preparing to erase me, not just from the house, but from the story of its existence. I spent that afternoon in the attic searching through old boxes, desperate to find any copy of the property deeds. My hands shook as I rummaged through dusty folders, the smell of mothballs filling my lungs. Nothing. They were gone. And yet, as fear consumed me, something else stirred inside. A whisper of defiance, faint but steady. If they wanted me to doubt myself, they had underestimated me. I may have been old, but I was not senile. I may have been quiet, but I was not weak. They had forgotten who built this house, who kept it alive through storms and debts and endless nights of labor. That night, as the Christmas lights flickered outside, I sat by the window, my notebook open on my lap. I wrote everything Mrs. Whitman had said, every detail of the strangers she saw, every cruel word my daughter-in-law had spoken at dinner. The notebook became my secret weapon, my silent witness. If no one else would believe me, I would make sure the truth was written down. When the house grew quiet, I whispered to myself, they think they can sell it. They think they can erase me. But I am not done. Not yet. I looked at the house glowing in the night, and for the first time, I felt the fire of resistance rising in my chest. They wanted to make me a ghost in my own story, but ghosts have a way of haunting, and I was ready to haunt them until the very end. The pressure did not come all at once like a single blow. It built slowly, round after round, until I was drowning in it. By the time December arrived, the whispers had turned into open demands. The conspiracy no longer hid in shadows. It stood before me, bold and shameless, and I was the only one pretending it was not real. It began one Sunday afternoon when my son invited his in-laws over for dinner. I should have felt honored, but instead I felt like a stranger in my own home. Megan's mother swept into my living room with her fur coat and sharp perfume, looking around as though she owned the place. "Such a spacious house," she remarked, her eyes darting over the walls and windows. "But it's far too much for one woman, don't you think?" Her words landed like arrows. Her husband chimed in with a booming laugh. At her age, maintaining a house like this must be exhausting. It would be better suited for a young family. "Don't you agree, Robert?" He turned to my son. My son hesitated for a second, then nodded faintly, his eyes avoiding mine. The silence was louder than any words he could have spoken. I sat at the head of the table, my hands folded tightly in my lap, my knuckles white. "This is my home," I said quietly. "I've managed it just fine for 20 years. But my voice was drowned out by laughter, by the scrape of cutlery, by the dismissive glances that passed around the table, as though my words were nothing more than the mutterings of a stubborn old woman. From that night on, the campaign escalated. Megan began leaving real estate brochures on the counter where I prepared my tea. Bright pictures of retirement communities with cheerful elderly couples smiling under slogans like, "Enjoy your golden years without worry." I threw them in the trash, but the next day more would appear. She slid them under my bedroom door, left them in the bathroom cabinet, even tucked them into my coat pocket. It was relentless, a constant reminder that they wanted me gone. My son joined the chorus. "Mom," he said one evening as we sat in the dim light of the living room, "maybe it's time to think about the future, those senior residences. They have medical staff, activities, friends your age. It could be good for you." He said it gently, but his words were knives. I turned to him, my voice shaking. "And what about this house? What about my memories, my life?" He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You can't take memories with you, Mom. Houses are just walls." Just walls. The phrase echoed in my chest. How could he say that? The boy who once helped me paint those walls, who chose the color of his childhood bedroom, who laughed as he tracked mud across the floors. To him now, it was just property. To me, it was blood and sacrifice. The grandchildren, too young to understand, were used as pawns. Megan would loudly complain in front of them. "There's no room for the kids to play with all this old furniture cluttering the place. Don't you want them to have space, Grandma?" The children looked at me with innocent eyes, repeating her words. "Grandma. Why don't you move to a fun place with other grandmas? Then we can live here." Their voices, filled with childish sweetness, crushed me more than their mother's venom ever could. I became a ghost in my own home. Decisions were made without me. Megan rearranged the rooms, moved my belongings into boxes stacked in the garage. When I asked where my sewing machine was, the one I had used for decades to feed my family, she waved her hand dismissively. "It was taking up space. We'll donate it." Donate it? That machine had paid for my son's education, for the very roof over his head, and now it was dismissed as junk. Each day brought a new humiliation. My favorite chair disappeared. My photo albums were hidden. Even the kitchen, my sanctuary where I had baked for Christmas every year, was taken over. Megan declared herself in charge of holiday preparations. "You've worked enough, Eleanor. Sit and rest. We'll handle it." But it wasn't kindness. It was erasure. She was erasing me from the traditions I had created, from the life I had built, until nothing of me remained in that house but a shadow. One night, I overheard them in the living room while I sat alone in my bedroom. Megan's voice was sharp. "She's stubborn, but we'll wear her down. She doesn't have anywhere else to go. Once we move her into a retirement home, she won't fight us anymore." My son's voice followed, tired and weak. "I just don't want to fight, Megan. She's my mother." Her laughter rang out, cold and triumphant. "She's old. She'll give up. They always do." I pressed my fist to my mouth to silence the sob that threatened to escape. The words cut deeper than knives. old. They saw me not as a woman, not as the mother who had raised him, but as a burden, an obstacle to be removed. I felt the walls closing in, my sanctuary turning into a prison, each room a reminder of my impending exile. The worst came during a family gathering 2 weeks before Christmas. The house was filled with relatives from Megan's side, loud voices and laughter bouncing off the walls. I tried to stay in the background, serving food, cleaning plates, but I could hear the whispers, see the glances. One of her cousins nudged her and said, loudly enough for me to hear, "So, when do you finally get this place?" Megan smirked and replied, "Soon, very soon." The room erupted in laughter. My son said nothing. His silence was the loudest betrayal of all. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in the darkened living room. The Christmas tree twinkled in the corner, its lights reflecting off the ornaments I had collected over decades. Each ornament told a story. Our first Christmas as a family, the year my son was born, the handmade star my husband crafted before he died. I stared at them through tears, realizing that to everyone else in this house, those memories meant nothing. They saw only value in bricks and walls, not in the history written within them. The pressure was suffocating. I could not breathe without being reminded that I was no longer welcome, that I was one step away from being thrown into a place where the elderly are tucked away and forgotten. And yet, even as despair pressed down on me, there was a flicker of something else inside, a whisper that said, "Endure, watch, remember. They believe you are weak, but weakness can be a disguise." I closed my notebook that night with trembling hands, the ink smudged by my tears. I wrote down every word, every insult, every laugh that cut me open, because one day, I promised myself, their words would be the very evidence that destroyed them. They thought I was powerless, but power sometimes lies in patience. Christmas Eve arrived with a cruel irony. The night that once meant warmth, laughter, and unity became the stage for my deepest humiliation. From the morning, I could feel the tension humming in the air like a storm about to break. Megan bustled through the kitchen, barking orders, her voice sharp as knives slicing into the holiday silence. My son hovered in the background, avoiding me, as though my very presence embarrassed him. The grandchildren ran around, giggling, but even their laughter carried an edge, because I could hear them repeating their mother's words. "Grandma is too old. Grandma can't keep up." I tried to hold on to tradition. I had risen early, determined to bake the Christmas bread I made every year since Robert died. My hands kneaded the dough, remembering the way he used to sit at the counter, smiling as the smell filled the house. But halfway through, Megan stormed in. "What are you doing?" she snapped, grabbing the bowl from my hands. "We don't need your outdated recipes. We have a modern menu. Sit down and stop making a mess." Her tone was not one of a daughter-in-law speaking to a mother figure, but of a conqueror dismissing a servant. The words stung, but worse was the silence that followed. My son stood at the doorway watching, his lips pressed tight. He did not defend me. He did not even meet my eyes. He simply turned and walked away. I sat at the kitchen table, my apron still dusted with flour, staring at my empty hands. For the first time in decades, I did not finish the Christmas bread. It felt as if they had taken not only my kitchen, but also my voice, my role, my identity. The day dragged on with little cruelties. Megan rearranged the seating so that I was pushed to the far corner of the table, away from the center where the family gathered. My chair was wobbly, as if deliberately chosen to remind me of my fragility. When I tried to join in conversation, Megan cut me off with a smirk. "Let's not stress Grandma with complicated talk. She forgets things easily." Laughter erupted, echoing like hammers in my chest. The humiliation mounted with every passing hour. The tree glittered in the living room, but its ornaments, once chosen with love, now felt like decorations in a stranger's home. The stockings I had embroidered with each grandchild's name were hidden, replaced with store-bought versions Megan had purchased. My traditions were erased one by one until I was a guest in the sanctuary I had built. As night fell, the smell of roasted meat filled the house. I sat silently, listening to their voices grow louder, their laughter crueler, as the wine flowed. It was then that Megan struck the final blow. She stood suddenly, her glass raised, her eyes glittering with malice. "To new beginnings," she declared, "to making this house truly ours." The words were met with cheers. My heart clenched. Truly ours. She said it as though I no longer existed, as though I were already dead. I rose from my chair, trembling but determined to speak. "This is my home," I said, my voice breaking yet strong. "I built it with my hands, with your father's memory, with every sacrifice I ever made. Do not forget who you are speaking to." The room fell silent for a heartbeat. Then Megan laughed, cold and sharp. "Your home? Don't be ridiculous. Robert is your son, and what belongs to him belongs to us. That's how families work." The others murmured in agreement, their faces twisted with scorn. I looked at my son, desperate for a sign of loyalty. "Robert, tell her this is still my home." But he would not meet my gaze. He simply whispered, "Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be." The betrayal shattered me. My knees nearly buckled. "Harder than what?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Harder than throwing your own mother into the street?" Megan slammed her glass onto the table, the sound ringing like a gavel. "Enough!" she shouted. "You're ruining Christmas for everyone. You don't belong here anymore. Get out!" The words hit like a bullet. Gasps rippled through the room, but no one moved to stop her. Not my son, not her parents, not a single soul. I stood frozen, the blood roaring in my ears. "You're asking me to leave my own house?" Megan stepped closer, her smile cruel. "Not asking, telling. There's no room for you here. Pack your things and go. Tonight." The children stared wide-eyed, confusion mixing with fear. One of them whispered, "Why is Grandma leaving?" But Megan silenced them with a glare. I walked slowly to my room, my vision blurred with tears. Each step felt like walking toward my own execution. I opened the closet where my dresses hung, each one sewn by my own hands, and pulled out a small suitcase. I packed only the essentials, a few clothes, my Bible, and the photo album of my late husband. Everything else, the furniture, the heirlooms, the life I had built, was left behind. As I zipped the suitcase, I felt the walls close in, the house itself rejecting me. My sanctuary had become my prison, and now it was my exile. I carried the suitcase to the door. The night air rushed in, icy and merciless. Snowflakes swirled in the wind, glistening under the Christmas lights that twinkled mockingly above the porch. Behind me, Megan's voice rang out one last time. "Don't come back. This is our home now." My son stood beside her, silent, his face pale, his eyes avoiding mine. That silence was worse than any insult, worse than any slap. It was the silence of betrayal, the silence of a man who chose his wife's cruelty over his mother's dignity. I stepped out into the snow, the door slamming shut behind me. The sound echoed like a coffin lid closing. I stood there for a long moment, the cold biting into my skin, the weight of 70 years pressing down on my shoulders. The street was quiet, the distant sound of carols drifting through the night. "Silent night, holy night," someone sang. But my night was neither silent nor holy. It was cruel. It was unforgettable. I walked slowly down the driveway, my suitcase dragging through the snow. I looked back once through the window and saw them gathered around the table, laughing, eating, celebrating my absence as though it were a gift. My heart broke into 1,000 pieces, but in that breaking, something else stirred. I felt a rage colder than the wind, sharper than the snow. not the blind rage of a fool, but the deliberate, controlled rage of a woman who has survived too much to be destroyed now. As the snow covered my footprints, erasing my presence from the ground, I swore to myself it would not erase me from history. That night they thought they had won. They thought they had silenced me, erased me, buried me under humiliation. But they were wrong, because exile does not always mean defeat. Sometimes exile is only the prologue to war. I whispered into the dark, my breath freezing in the air. You will regret this. You will regret every word, every laugh, every silence. You think I am finished? I am only beginning. The hotel room was small, the kind travelers rent when they have nowhere else to go, but to me it felt like a battlefield tent. I sat on the stiff bedspread, staring at the yellowed lamp, the sound of distant traffic bleeding through thin walls. I had been exiled from my own home on Christmas Eve, yet I was not broken. My humiliation had hardened into something else, resolve. At dawn, I rose, unable to sleep any longer. The cold coffee from the hotel lobby tasted bitter, but it sharpened me. I opened my suitcase, pulled out the notebook I had hidden under my pillow, and began to read every entry I had made over the past months. Each word was evidence, each detail a nail in the coffin of their scheme. Missing papers, realtors inspecting without my consent, the brochures, the cruel laughter, the insults disguised as concern. It was all there, written in my shaky handwriting. Proof that I was not crazy, proof that I was not senile, proof that I had been targeted step by step by the very family I had given everything to. But I needed more than words. I needed the documents, the deeds, the tangible proof of ownership that Megan thought she had stolen from me. My late husband had once told me, "Eleanor, never keep only one copy of what matters. Paper burns. Paper disappears. But if you prepare, you will never be powerless." His voice echoed in my memory, a lifeline thrown across the years. I remembered then the safe deposit box at the local bank. I had opened it more than 2 decades earlier after Robert passed, tucking away duplicates of the property deeds, insurance policies, and even the receipts from the construction of the house. I had not thought about it in years, but suddenly it was the key to everything. That morning, with the snow still heavy on the streets, I walked into the bank. The manager, Mr. Patterson, looked surprised to see me. "Mrs. Crawford," he said warmly, "it's been a long time." His respect was genuine, the kind that only comes from years of watching someone manage their finances with discipline and dignity. "I need access to my box," I said, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. Within minutes, the metal door opened with a heavy click, and the small box was set before me in a private room. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside, neatly stacked, were the documents I had feared lost forever. The original property deed signed in my name, the mortgage receipts, every payment recorded and stamped as paid, copies of my insurance papers. Even the photographs of me and Robert on the day we first stood in front of the half-built house, smiling with pride. I clutched the papers to my chest, tears filling my eyes. They had thought they erased me, but here was proof carved into ink and signatures that this house was mine, beyond question, beyond manipulation. From the bank, I went directly to the office of an attorney recommended by Mr. Patterson. His name was Thomas Gallagher, a man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes sharp as steel. He listened without interruption as I poured out my story, from the first missing papers to the cold night in the snow. He examined my notebook, the photos on my phone of the damage they had done, the copies of deeds from the safe deposit box. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "Mrs. Crawford," he said, "they underestimated you. This case is strong, stronger than most I've seen. What they've done isn't just cruel, it's criminal. Fraud, trespassing, attempted theft. And if they tried to claim you were incompetent, that's falsification of medical records if they fabricated anything. We can act swiftly." For the first time in months, I felt the weight on my chest lighten. Someone believed me. Someone saw me not as a burden, not as a senile old woman, but as a client with rights, a fighter with a case worth winning. "Can we stop them?" I asked, my voice trembling. Thomas smiled faintly. "Not only can we stop them, Mrs. Crawford, we can throw them out. But I need to know, are you ready for war? Because this will not be quiet. It will be public. And once it begins, there is no going back." I looked down at the deed in my hands, at the name Eleanor Crawford printed in black ink, the ink that represented years of blood and sacrifice. I thought of my husband, of the promises we made to protect this sanctuary. I thought of the way Megan laughed as she threw me into the snow, the way my son lowered his eyes in cowardice. The humiliation boiled inside me, but so did clarity. "Yes," I said firmly, "I am ready." The lawyer nodded. "Then tomorrow we begin. I'll file for an emergency eviction order. The police will accompany us to serve it. We'll gather every piece of evidence and make sure the court sees the truth." As I left his office, the winter sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, reflecting off the snow like a promise. My humiliation was no longer my identity. It was my weapon. They had stripped me of dignity. But in doing so, they had awakened the fighter they thought was long buried. That night in the hotel, I spread the documents across the bed like a general mapping a campaign. Each paper was a soldier in my army, each note a bullet. I felt no despair, only anticipation. Tomorrow I would return to the house they had stolen, not as a broken woman begging for scraps of respect, but as the rightful owner, armed with the law and the fire of justice. They thought Christmas Eve had ended me. What they didn't know was that it had rebirthed me. I was no longer just a mother betrayed. I was a warrior preparing to reclaim what was mine. And when the door of that house opened again, it would not be Megan's laughter echoing through the halls. It would be her fear. The next morning, I didn't walk up to my house as a guest or an intruder. I walked up as its rightful owner. The air was sharp, the snow crunching under my boots. My lawyer had told me we would file the eviction order that afternoon, but I needed to look my son in the eyes before the law intervened. I needed to see if there was still a trace of the boy I had raised, or if he was gone forever, swallowed whole by greed and cowardice. I rang the doorbell, my heart hammering against my ribs. For a moment, silence. Then the door opened, and there he was, my son, Robert. His hair was unkempt, his face tired, as if he hadn't slept. He forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Mom," he said softly, like he used to when he knew he had done something wrong. "You shouldn't be here." I stepped past him without waiting for permission, my suitcase still in my hand. "This is my house," I said, my voice calm but unyielding. "I will always be here." He closed the door behind me, his shoulders slumping. The living room smelled of last night's wine and cigarette smoke, the aftermath of a celebration that had mocked my absence. The children's toys were scattered across the floor, the once polished coffee table sticky with stains. It was no longer the home I had nurtured. It was a battlefield. "Mom, please," he whispered, glancing toward the kitchen where Megan's voice drifted faintly. "Don't start this now. We'll talk later." "No," I said firmly, turning to face him. "We will talk now. You stood by while your wife threw me into the snow on Christmas Eve. You said nothing. You let her humiliate me, erase me, destroy me in front of my grandchildren. And you, my son, the boy I carried in my arms, did nothing." He flinched, his eyes darting to the floor. "I didn't know what to say," he muttered. "You didn't know what to say." My voice trembled with fury. "You could have said one word, stop. You could have said, 'This is my mother.' But you stayed silent, and your silence cut deeper than her cruelty ever could." His hand shook as he rubbed the back of his neck. "You don't understand, Mom. Things are complicated. Megan, she has strong opinions. I just wanted peace." "Peace?" I stepped closer, my eyes locking onto his. "Do you call it peace to let your mother freeze in the snow while your wife feasts at my table? Do you call it peace to let strangers walk through my house with clipboards, measuring my windows like vultures circling prey? That is not peace, Robert. That is betrayal." He looked up at me then, his eyes wet with shame. "We were desperate," he whispered. "The debts, the bills, the kids. I thought if we could take over the house, sell it, we could start fresh. Megan said it was the only way." I felt my chest tighten, not with pity, but with rage. "And you agreed? You agreed to steal from me? To treat me like an obstacle to your comfort? I sewed dresses until my fingers bled to put you through school, to pay for this house, and now you repay me by selling the very walls I built?" Tears slid down his face, but I did not soften. Not anymore. "I didn't want it to go this far," he said hoarsely. I told her I didn't want to hurt you." "Hurt me?" My laugh was bitter, hollow. "You didn't just hurt me, Robert. You killed the last piece of trust I had in you. You stood by while they called me useless, while they erased me from my own traditions. You let them throw away the sewing machine that fed you, the ornaments I collected, the memories of your father. And now you expect me to believe you didn't want this?" He collapsed into the armchair, burying his face in his hands. For a moment, I almost saw the boy he had once been, the boy who cried when he scraped his knee, the boy who whispered promises to protect me. But that boy was gone. In his place sat a man who had chosen silence over loyalty, greed over love. I stood over him, my voice low but sharp. "I went to the bank yesterday. I found the original deed. I have every document, every receipt, every piece of proof that this house is mine and mine alone. You can lie to Megan, you can lie to yourself, but you cannot lie to the law." His head snapped up, his face pale. You went to the bank?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "And tomorrow the police will be here. Megan can laugh now, but her laughter will turn to ashes when the eviction order is read aloud. And you, Robert, you will have to choose. Will you stand with your wife, or will you finally stand with the woman who gave you life?" He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came. His silence was answer enough. I leaned down, my face inches from his. "I want you to remember this moment. Remember the day your mother looked you in the eye and saw the truth, that her son had chosen betrayal. I will fight, Robert, and I will win, not because I am stronger than you, but because I am right. And when I do, the shame will not be mine. It will be yours." I turned toward the door, my heart pounding. In the kitchen, I heard Megan's laughter, shrill and mocking. She did not yet know what was coming. She thought I was still the broken woman shivering in the snow, but she was wrong. Before leaving, I looked back one last time. My son sat slumped in the chair, his face ashen, his hands trembling. For a fleeting second, I felt the sting of sorrow, but it was drowned out by clarity. The boy I raised was gone. What remained was a man too weak to protect his own mother. I stepped into the cold once again. But this time I did not feel the bite of the wind. I felt the fire inside me, burning brighter than ever. The private confrontation was over. The public reckoning was about to begin. The following afternoon, the street outside my house was covered in a fresh blanket of snow, untouched and shimmering like glass. But peace was an illusion, because war was about to march right up to my front door. I arrived not alone this time, but with Thomas Gallagher, my lawyer, and 2 uniformed police officers. Behind them came a court official carrying a folder of documents thick enough to bury every lie Megan had told. The neighbors noticed first. Curtains twitched, doors opened, and within minutes, a small crowd gathered, drawn like moths to the fire of scandal. They knew my family. They had seen Megan's arrogance, Robert's silence, my quiet dignity. Now they would witness the reckoning. I stood tall despite the tremor in my chest. For months I had been humiliated, erased, exiled. Today I was not the victim. Today I was the storm. Thomas knocked firmly on the door. The laughter inside died instantly. After a moment, Megan opened it, her face painted with surprise that quickly twisted into annoyance. "What is this?" she demanded, blocking the doorway. "Good afternoon," Thomas said evenly, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "I am attorney Thomas Gallagher, legal representative of Mrs. Eleanor Crawford, the rightful owner of this property. We are here to serve an immediate eviction order for illegal trespassing." Megan's smirk faltered. "Trespassing?" she scoffed. "This is my husband's home. We have every right—" The police officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, do you have any documentation proving legal ownership?" Her eyes flickered nervously. "My husband is the son of the owner. That's enough." "Not in the eyes of the law," the officer replied coldly. He gestured toward Thomas, who opened the folder and pulled out the original deed. He held it high for everyone to see. "This document, signed and notarized, proves the property belongs solely to Mrs. Crawford. Furthermore, we have evidence of attempted fraud, including missing documents and falsified claims of her incompetence. Your occupancy here is unlawful. You have 2 hours to vacate." A gasp rippled through the crowd outside. Neighbors whispered, their eyes darting from me to Megan, hungry for every detail. Megan's face turned crimson. "This is elder abuse. She's confused. She doesn't know what she's doing." I stepped forward, my voice steady and sharp. "Confused? Do you call this confusion?" I held up the receipts, the mortgage payments stamped and paid in full. "I built this house with my hands, with my sweat. Every penny came from my work as a seamstress, and you, an intruder, dare to tell me I don't know my own name?" Her mother appeared behind her, wringing her hands. "Please, this isn't necessary. We can talk like family." "Family?" My voice cracked through the air like a whip. Family does not throw their mother into the snow on Christmas Eve. Family does not erase her memories, sell her belongings, and plot to steal her home. Family does not betray the blood that gave them life. The crowd murmured, nodding. A neighbor shouted, "We saw her, Megan. We saw Eleanor out in the cold while you were celebrating inside." The weight of public judgment pressed down like stone. Megan turned to Robert, who had appeared in the hallway, his face pale and drawn. "Say something," she hissed. "Tell them this is our house." But Robert's eyes were empty, his voice trembling. I can't." Megan spun on him, her fury spilling out in front of everyone. "Coward, you promised me this house. You said you'd handle her. You're nothing without me." Gasps erupted from the neighbors. The police officer scribbled notes. Thomas raised his eyebrows, satisfied as the truth spilled out of Megan's own mouth. I stepped closer, my eyes never leaving hers. "You wanted me gone because you thought I was weak, but weakness was your illusion, Megan. The truth is here, written in ink, backed by law, witnessed by every person standing outside this door. You thought you could erase me, but today it is you who will be erased." She trembled, her mask cracking. "You'll regret this," she spat, but her voice was shaky, stripped of the arrogance she had worn like armor. The court official cleared his throat. "You have exactly 2 hours to collect your personal belongings. Any property belonging to Mrs. Crawford must remain. The officers will supervise to ensure compliance." Megan screamed, a raw, ugly sound, and stormed up the stairs, slamming doors as she began to pack. Her mother wept in the kitchen. The children cried, not understanding why their holiday paradise had turned into a nightmare. I stood in the center of the living room, my heart pounding but my spine straight. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lift. I was not the intruder. I was not the burden. I was the rightful owner, and justice was on my side. The neighbors clapped quietly, their whispers swelling into a chorus of approval. "She did it," someone said. She stood up to them. Phones were raised, videos recorded. The story was no longer private. It was a spectacle, a warning to anyone who thought they could betray blood without consequence. Robert approached me slowly, his eyes wet with shame. "Mom," he whispered, "I'm sorry. I never wanted it to go this far." I looked at him, my heart torn between sorrow and anger. "You had every chance to stop it, Robert. You chose silence. Silence is betrayal, and now you must live with it." He lowered his head, tears dripping onto the floor, but I felt no triumph, only clarity. The boy I had raised was gone, replaced by a man who had surrendered his soul for comfort. As the hours passed, chaos reigned. Megan's family ran through the house, stuffing clothes into bags, arguing, blaming one another. The officers watched silently, ensuring they took nothing that was mine. My furniture remained, my photos, my ornaments, my sewing machine, once shoved into the garage, was returned to its rightful place. When the final minute struck, the officers ushered them out. Megan glared at me from the porch, her hair disheveled, her voice hoarse from rage. "This isn't over," she hissed. "I'll find a way to destroy you." I met her eyes, calm and unflinching. "No, Megan, it is over. Because from this day forward, you have no power here. The house is mine. The law is mine. And your hatred will eat you alive long before it ever touches me again." The officers closed the door behind them, and silence filled the house. I stood in the center of my living room, the Christmas lights twinkling once more, not as symbols of humiliation, but of survival. Outside, the neighbors cheered, softly, their voices carrying through the winter air. Inside, I felt the warmth of victory, not just for me, but for every woman who had ever been underestimated, every mother who had ever been betrayed. That was the moment I knew they had thrown me out into the snow, but I had walked back in with fire, and that fire would never be extinguished. The storm inside my house did not end when the door closed behind Megan and her family. In fact, it had only begun. For betrayal that unfolds in private can be ignored, excused, buried under silence. But once the world sees it, once witnesses carry the story like fire, there is no hiding from the truth. That night, I sat by the living room window, the glow of Christmas lights reflecting against the snow outside, and I saw the crowd still gathered on the street. Neighbors whispered to one another, pointing toward the house, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. Phones glimmered like stars as videos and photos spread faster than the falling snowflakes. By the next morning, everyone in town would know what had happened. I did not have to wait that long. An hour after the eviction, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find Mrs. Whitman, the same neighbor who had innocently told me about the visitors inspecting my house weeks earlier. Her eyes shone with tears, and she grasped my hands tightly. "Eleanor," she whispered, "I saw everything. I saw what they did to you on Christmas Eve, and now the whole neighborhood knows the truth. You were right all along." Her words struck me like a blessing. For months I had been gaslit, told I was confused, incompetent, senile. Now, standing in the cold light of day, I was vindicated. Someone else had seen. Someone else had believed. More neighbors followed. The Millers from across the street, the Carters from 2 doors down, even the young college student who rented the basement apartment at the end of the block. They all came, each with their own version of the same message. We saw, we heard, we know. One man even admitted, "We thought maybe you were exaggerating when you complained about Megan. She always smiled in public, always pretended to be so helpful, but tonight we saw the mask fall. We saw who she really is." Each word fueled me, not with vengeance, but with justice. For justice is not only written in law, it lives in the voices of witnesses, in the judgment of a community that refuses to look away. By morning, the story had already spread beyond the block. Veronica, Megan's sister, had tried to twist the narrative by posting videos online, calling me a bitter old woman who threw her family into the snow. But her plan backfired, because in the background of her videos, the truth was clear. The police officers, the lawyer, the official documents being read aloud. Strangers on the internet were quick to point it out. Comments flooded in, condemning her cruelty, mocking Megan's arrogance. The internet, like fire, consumed their lies and turned them to ash. Even the children became unwilling witnesses. The day after the eviction, my eldest grandson knocked timidly on my door. His eyes were red from crying. He looked at me, his small voice trembling. "Grandma, why did Mommy say you were crazy? You're not crazy." I knelt down, holding his tiny hands in mine, my heart breaking and healing at the same time. "No, sweetheart," I whispered. "I'm not crazy. Sometimes grown-ups say cruel things when they want something that doesn't belong to them. But remember this: kindness is never weakness. Don't ever forget that." He nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks, and hugged me tightly before his father whisked him away, too ashamed to linger. The witnesses multiplied. The postman, who had delivered envelopes of real estate advertisements to my door, confessed he had wondered why they were addressed to Megan. The clerk at the grocery store remembered Megan bragging about finally getting the beach house. Piece by piece, the puzzle of betrayal assembled itself, and every witness who spoke added another stone to the wall of truth I was building. The fire spread further still. The local newspaper ran a headline 2 days later: "Elderly woman reclaims home after family fraud." The article recounted the eviction, the falsified documents, the attempted theft. My name was in print, not as a victim, but as a survivor, a fighter who stood against betrayal and won. The article ended with a quote from me: "Family is not defined by blood, but by loyalty." Those words echoed across town, shared in whispers, in sermons at church, in classrooms where teachers told children the story of the grandmother who refused to be erased. Of course, Megan and her family could not escape the blaze. Her co-workers whispered behind her back. Her so-called friends stopped answering her calls. Robert faced humiliation at his office, colleagues side-eyeing him, wondering how a man could betray his own mother so openly. Their betrayal was no longer a private sin. It was a public scar they carried everywhere, and that was the true power of witnesses. They made sure the story could never be rewritten, never softened, never erased. My daughter-in-law could scream that I was bitter. My son could claim it was all a misunderstanding, but the world had already seen. The neighbors had spoken. The police had acted. The community had judged. And in that judgment, I was restored. That night, as I sat once more by the window, the snow falling quietly outside, I realized something important. It wasn't just about the house. It was about dignity. Betrayal can break you in the silence of your own heart, but once truth is exposed to the light, it grows stronger than any lie. And when others carry that truth with you, it becomes unstoppable. The fire had spread, and it would burn in their lives far longer than the cold of that Christmas night ever burned in mine. After the eviction, silence returned to my house, but it was not the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of victory. For the first time in months, I could walk through the halls without hearing Megan's laughter or Robert's evasive whispers. The air no longer smelled of cigarette smoke or spilled wine. It smelled of pine and soap after I opened every window and scrubbed every corner. My house was mine again, but the story was far from over, because every act of betrayal leaves behind consequences, and theirs arrived swiftly, as relentless as the winter wind. Within days, Megan's reputation collapsed. The videos her sister posted spread across town and beyond. She had intended to shame me, but instead she shamed herself. People saw her arrogance, her greed, the venom in her voice. Her friends stopped inviting her to gatherings. Parents at her children's school avoided her, whispering as she walked past. She became a pariah, the woman who tried to steal from her own mother-in-law. The humiliation she had so freely poured on me now drowned her. Robert did not fare better. At his office, colleagues who once admired him now looked at him with contempt. "That's the man who betrayed his own mother," they whispered. His boss called him in, warning that the company could not afford scandal. Promotions vanished, opportunities dried up, and the weight of his choices settled heavily on his shoulders. The silence he once chose to protect his marriage became the very silence that destroyed his career. The law moved quickly, too. With Thomas by my side, we pressed charges for attempted fraud and falsification of documents. The doctor who signed the false incompetence report was suspended, his name smeared across the papers. Megan and Robert were summoned to court, forced to face the very system they had tried to manipulate. They pleaded for mercy. But the evidence was clear. Forged signatures, missing deeds, witness testimonies. They could not escape. The judge's gavel struck like thunder, declaring their actions criminal. Fines were imposed, probation assigned, and their names recorded in public record. The weight of the law now pressed on them, just as they once pressed it on me. And yet, even as justice unfolded, the greatest punishment was not legal. It was social. Everywhere they went, people stared. Old friends crossed the street to avoid them. Invitations disappeared. The betrayal of blood is a wound the world does not forgive easily, and their scar was visible to all. As for me, I did not revel in their downfall. No, my triumph was quieter, deeper. I hired a cleaning service, replaced what had been broken, restored what had been stolen. I brought my sewing machine back into the living room and let my fingers trace the fabric once more, reminding myself of the strength that had always lived in my hands. My house breathed again, every room echoing not with humiliation but with resilience. Still, sorrow lingered. I could not erase the image of my son standing silent as I was thrown into the snow. That wound would never fully heal, but I learned to live with it. Because forgiveness is not owed to those who do not repent. My dignity was worth more than his cowardice. Neighbors came often, bringing food, flowers, or simply their presence. They told me I had inspired them, that I had shown what it meant to fight for oneself even in old age. Some even said, "You're proof that kindness is not weakness, Eleanor. It is power when wielded with courage." Their words warmed me more than any fire. And the children, my grandchildren, remained innocent witnesses. Though Megan tried to poison them with lies, they remembered what they had seen. Their grandmother thrown into the cold, her eyes filled with pain, her dignity intact. One day they would grow and they would understand, and perhaps then they would seek me out, not as the bitter figure their mother painted, but as the survivor who taught them the truth of loyalty. In the end, the aftermath was simple. They had tried to take everything from me, my home, my dignity, my sanity. Instead, they lost everything that mattered to them: respect, reputation, trust. And I, the woman they called weak, walked away with all of it intact. Sometimes justice does not roar like a lion. Sometimes it whispers, steady and relentless, until the guilty are suffocated by the echo of their own deeds. That was the justice I lived in the weeks after Christmas. My house was quiet, yes, but it was a quiet filled with peace. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Weeks passed after the eviction, and with every sunrise I felt myself breathing more freely. My house, once tainted with betrayal, began to heal, just as I did. The rooms were no longer filled with hostile laughter or whispered conspiracies. They echoed with silence, but not the silence of loneliness, the silence of peace. I filled it with the soft hum of my sewing machine, the crackle of the fireplace, the sound of my own footsteps on polished floors. For the first time in years, my house belonged only to me again. One cold morning in January, I stood on the porch, watching snow fall gently over the roses buried beneath the frost. I remembered all the Christmases that had come before, the ones with Robert laughing as a child, with my husband carrying the tree through the door, with the grandchildren tugging on my apron, begging for cookies. Those memories still lived in me, though the people who created them had chosen betrayal over loyalty. And I realized something then. They could strip my house of furniture, they could tear my traditions apart, but they could never erase the love and sacrifice that built it. That was mine forever. Still, the wound of my son's silence lingered. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how a child I raised with such devotion could look away as I was cast into the snow. Letters came, weak apologies written in Robert's hand, always blaming desperation, always asking me to move past it. I never replied, because true apology is not written on paper. It is carved in action, and his actions had spoken louder than any words could. I chose instead to rebuild my life in ways they could never touch. I hired a part-time housekeeper, not because I could not clean myself, but because I wanted witnesses, someone always present to see the truth of my life. I installed cameras, not for paranoia, but for certainty. Never again would I be cornered in my own sanctuary. Then came the decision about my will. For years, I had planned to leave the house to Robert, believing it would continue as a family legacy. But family had shown its true face. So I rewrote it. The house, when my time comes, will not go to him. It will go to charities that protect women, to organizations that defend the elderly from abuse, to children who have no home of their own. My legacy will not be betrayal. It will be dignity. The day I signed that new will, I felt lighter than I had in decades, because I understood something I had ignored for too long. Family is not blood. Family is loyalty. Family is the neighbor who stood on the sidewalk defending me with her voice. Family is the lawyer who fought beside me when I had no strength left. Family is every person who told me, "We believe you," when I had been silenced. Blood betrayed me. Loyalty saved me. Months later, spring arrived. The roses in my garden bloomed again, stubborn and vibrant against the odds. I stood among them, the sun warm on my face, and I felt the same resilience in myself. Age had not made me fragile. Betrayal had not destroyed me. I was still here, stronger than before, my dignity intact. One evening, as the sun dipped into the horizon, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. I thought of the night I had been thrown into the snow, of the humiliation that burned hotter than the cold. I thought of the rage that grew from it, the fire that carried me back through the front door with police at my side. And I asked myself, was it worth it? The answer came without hesitation, yes. Because in fighting for my home, I had reclaimed more than bricks and wood. I had reclaimed myself. The final irony came in the form of a letter, months later. It was from Robert. His handwriting was shaky, his words desperate. He begged for forgiveness, told me their debts had swallowed them whole, that Megan's arrogance had cost them friends, jobs, and peace. "The children miss you," he wrote. "Can we start over?" I held the letter for a long time, my hands trembling. Part of me longed to say yes, to believe that love could erase betrayal. But deep down, I knew. Forgiveness without repentance is only permission for betrayal to happen again. I placed the letter in a drawer, unanswered, because I had already made my choice. My life no longer revolved around their acceptance. My story no longer depended on their loyalty. I had closed that chapter, not out of bitterness, but out of survival. And so I ask you, listening now, what would you have done? Would you have forgiven, knowing the knife might strike again? Or would you have done as I did and chosen dignity over illusion? Because dignity, once reclaimed, is more precious than any apology. As the days stretch forward, I no longer measure time by holidays ruined or betrayals endured. I measure it by peace, by mornings when the sun warms my roses, by evenings when I drink tea on the porch, no longer afraid of shadows in the hallway, by the steady knowledge that I fought and I won. And that is what I want you to take from my story, not the sorrow of betrayal, not even the satisfaction of revenge, but the power of standing tall when the world tries to break you. Never let anyone convince you that your age makes you weak, that your silence makes you powerless, that your kindness makes you disposable. I was thrown into the snow on Christmas Eve, but I rose again. And so can you. So tell me, if your dignity were on the line, would you fight for it? Or would you let it be stolen under the guise of family? I know my answer, and I hope after hearing my story, you know yours too.